The empty Echo Julia Reeves stared at her wilting snake plant, once vibrant and thriving like everything else in her life. Now it drooped, mirroring the heaviness in her chest. 6 months since Daniel had walked out, taking pieces of her with him that she wasn't sure she'd ever recover. "Come on, just a little water," she whispered, droplets falling from the small watering can onto soil that had long since hardened. As a botanical illustrator, plants had always been her salvation, their silent strength a comfort. But lately, even they seemed to be giving up on her. Her phone buzzed with another message from Zara. "Coffee? Or are you still hibernating?" Julia sighed. Her best friend had been patient, but Julia couldn't bear the pitying looks or forced encouragement. She set the phone down without replying. Outside her apartment window, Seattle's perpetual drizzle painted everything in shades of gray. Julia grabbed her jacket. She needed fresh soil, and maybe fresh air would do her some good, too. The local nursery was nearly empty on this dreary Tuesday afternoon. Julia wandered the aisles, running her fingers over soft moss and rough bark, searching for something that might inspire her to pick up her brushes again. Her client deadline loomed next week, but the pages of her sketchbook remained blank. "They like more light than you'd think." The voice startled her. Julia turned to see a man examining the same shelf of succulents, his expression thoughtful rather than intrusive. "Sorry," she asked. "Echeverrias," he replied, gesturing to the rosette-shaped plants. "Everyone thinks they need shade because they're succulents, but they thrive in brightness." His smile was gentle, almost shy beneath his dark curls. "I'm Leo, by the way." "Julia." She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, surprised at how easily her name slipped out. They ended up talking for 20 minutes about plant care, his work as a marine biologist studying kelp forests, and her stalled illustrations. There was something calming about Leo's presence. No pressure, no awkward questions about her love life. Just conversation that flowed as naturally as water. When they parted, Julia found herself holding not only soil, but also a healthy echeveria and Leo's number scrawled on the nursery receipt. "For plant emergencies," he'd joked, but his eyes held a warmth that stayed with Julia as she walked home through the rain. That evening, she placed the succulent in her sunniest window. For the first time in months, she opened her sketchbook and began a tentative outline of its perfect spiral form. The lines were hesitant, but they were there. Later, while brewing tea, she noticed her reflection in the kitchen window, faint but present. Like her, it seemed transparent and ghostly, but undeniably still there. She realized she'd gone an entire hour without thinking about Daniel, about the way he'd said, "I just don't love you anymore," as casually as commenting on the weather. As Julia curled up on her couch, the soft scratch of pencil against paper filled the silence of her apartment. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a whisper of something that felt like possibility. Part 2. Ripples of Change. "You actually went outside? To a store? And talked to a human man?" Zara's eyes widened over her cappuccino. "This is cause for celebration." Julia rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. They sat at their favorite cafe, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. "It's not a big deal. We talked about plants." "Plants are a gateway drug to actual human connection," Zara insisted, brushing her box braids over one shoulder. "So, are you going to call him?" "Definitely not." Julia stirred her tea, watching the leaves swirl. "I'm not ready." Zara's expression softened. "I know Daniel was—" She searched for the right word. "Devastating. But not everyone will hurt you like that." Before Julia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Volunteer Day at Fremont Community Garden tomorrow. We could use someone with plant knowledge." No pressure. Julia showed Zara the message, who practically bounced in her seat. "The universe is speaking! Go!" "I don't know." "Jules, you've been drawing the same succulent for a week. You need new material." She wasn't wrong. Julia's client had been understanding about her creative block, but the deadline extension wouldn't last forever. Perhaps some time among living things, plants and people, might spark something. The next day, Julia found herself at the entrance of the community garden, second-guessing her decision. Just as she considered leaving, Leo appeared carrying seedling trays. "You came," he said, his smile genuine but not overwhelming. "We're planting native pollinators today." Working side by side, Julia found herself relaxing. Leo was easy to be around. He didn't fill silence with needless chatter, and when he did speak, he listened to her responses with genuine interest. Others joined them, elderly couples, young families, college students. No one asked why she was there or what her story was. They simply welcomed her hands in the soil. "Why marine biology?" Julia asked as they planted milkweed for monarch butterflies. "It seems far from gardening." Leo's fingers gently pressed soil around a delicate stem. "I grew up in Puerto Rico, surrounded by ocean. My grandmother kept a garden, though, and taught me that all living systems are connected. Forests, gardens, coral reefs, they're all communities supporting each other." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you become an illustrator?" As Julia described her journey from art school to botanical illustration, she realized she was speaking about her passions again, something Daniel had gradually made her feel trivial about. Leo listened attentively, asking questions that showed he valued her perspective. By afternoon's end, dirt under her fingernails and sun warming her cheeks, Julia felt something unfamiliar. Lightness. She'd taken photographs of several plants for reference and even sketched a quick study of bee balm that had attracted actual bees. "Same time next week?" Leo asked as they gathered their things. Julia hesitated only briefly. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Walking home, Julia noticed details she'd been blind to for months. The precise pattern of bark on cherry trees, the geometric precision of unfurling ferns, the subtle gradient of green to gold in leaves preparing for autumn. For the first time since Daniel left, she felt her fingers itching to capture the world around her. Growing Roots weeks passed, and Julia's Wednesdays at the garden became sacred. Her sketchbook filled with studies, delicate veining of leaves, the architectural structure of seed pods, and occasionally, when he wasn't looking, the thoughtful profile of Leo against the afternoon sun. Her client had been thrilled with her completed illustrations, native plants of the Pacific Northwest, rendered with a vibrant energy that even Julia recognized as new in her work. "You seem different," Zara observed one evening as they prepared dinner in Julia's apartment, now brightened by healthy plants and sketches pinned to walls. "Different how?" Julia asked, chopping vegetables for stir-fry. "Present. Like you're actually living instead of just existing." Zara bumped her hip playfully. "It's nice to have my friend back." Julia smiled, unable to disagree. Something had shifted. She still thought of Daniel occasionally, but the sharp pain had dulled to a distant ache, a scar rather than an open wound. Later that week, rain drove the garden volunteers inside the community greenhouse. Julia and Leo found themselves alone among the seedlings when the others left early. "Can I show you something?" Leo asked, eyes bright with excitement. He led her to a back corner where a tank hummed quietly. Inside, kelp fronds swayed in artificial current. "A mini version of my research project," he explained. "I'm studying how kelp forests can be restored to sequester carbon and rebuild marine habitats." Julia leaned close, fascinated by the underwater forest in miniature. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Their shoulders touched and neither moved away. "I got the grant," Leo said softly. "The one I mentioned for expanding the restoration project." "Leo!" "That's wonderful." Without thinking, Julia hugged him, genuinely happy for his success. His arms came around her naturally, and for a moment they stood connected. Julia felt his heartbeat against her chest, steady and sure. When they pulled apart, something had changed in the air between them. Leo's hand gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Julia," he began, voice low, "I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as garden friends, as a date." The familiar panic rose. Memories of loving and losing, of vulnerability weaponized. But looking into Leo's patient eyes, Julia recognized this fear for what it was, an echo of past pain, not a prediction of future harm. "I'd like that," she answered, surprising herself with her certainty. Over dinner at a small Peruvian restaurant, they shared stories beyond plants and work. Leo spoke of losing his father young, of being raised by his grandmother who taught him both strength and tenderness. Julia, hesitantly at first, then with growing trust, told him about Daniel, the slow erosion of her confidence, the final abandonment. "He didn't deserve your heart," Leo said simply, his fingers intertwining with hers across the table. Walking home along the waterfront, the night air cool against their skin, they stopped to watch moonlight shimmer on the bay. When Leo kissed her, it wasn't desperate or demanding, but gentle, a question rather than a claim. Julia answered by drawing closer, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the solid presence of someone who saw her completely. Part 4. Weathering the Storm. The text arrived on a sunny morning 3 months into Julia's relationship with Leo. "I miss you." "Can we talk?" Julia stared at her phone, her stomach twisting into knots. She'd been working on a new series of illustrations, underwater botanicals inspired by Leo's research, and now her hand trembled, unable to continue the delicate lines. She hadn't told Leo much about Daniel beyond the basics of their breakup. How could she explain the complexity, the good years before the bad, the way Daniel had gradually diminished her while claiming to love her? How completely she had lost herself trying to be what he wanted. When Leo arrived that evening, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, setting down the takeout he'd brought. Julia showed him the text, watching his face carefully. "I don't want to see him," she said firmly, "but it's brought up things." Instead of jealousy or dismissal, Leo nodded. "What do you need?" The question disarmed her. Daniel would have told her what she needed, what she should feel. "Space, I think. But not distance," she tried to explain. "I need to process this on my own terms, but I don't want to shut you out." "I understand," Leo said, and somehow she knew he truly did. "Take whatever time you need. I'll be here." In the days that followed, Julia declined Daniel's request to meet, but agreed to a phone call. Closure she realized she needed. Hearing his voice after so long was strange. Stranger still was recognizing the manipulative patterns in his words, the subtle ways he tried to make her question her new happiness. When she hung up, Julia sat in her apartment surrounded by her thriving plants, her art, the evidence of her rebuilt life. She texted Leo, "Can you come over?" He arrived with no expectations, simply present and supportive. They sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades she would later try to capture in watercolor. "I loved him," Julia said finally, "and he broke something in me that I'm still healing." Leo's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Healing isn't linear," he said, "and it doesn't have a deadline. I'm afraid," she admitted, voicing her deepest fear, "that I'll never fully trust again, that I'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop with you." "Then we'll take it one day at a time," Leo replied. "I can't promise we'll never hurt each other, that's not realistic. But I can promise to be honest, to listen, to respect your boundaries, and to work through problems together rather than alone." As night fell around them, Julia rested her head on his shoulder. There were no guarantees in love, this she knew too well. But there was something to be said for choosing to try again anyway. Later, in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, their bodies came together with both passion and tenderness. Julia traced the contours of Leo's face, memorizing him by touch. His hands moved over her skin with reverence, as if mapping constellations. In the shelter of each other's arms, Julia found herself fully present, unafraid to be seen, to be vulnerable, to be desired. Afterward, lying together in peaceful silence, Julia realized something profound. Healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating space for a future not defined by it. "Full bloom, are you sure about this?" Julia asked, standing before the gallery doors. Inside, 60 of her illustrations waited, a year's work combining botanical precision with the emotional journey of her healing. Leo squeezed her hand. "Absolutely sure. They're going to love your work as much as I do. Zara appeared beside them, elegant in a blue dress. Well, not quite as much as he does, because that would be weird. But they'll definitely appreciate your genius. She air-kissed Julia's cheek. Ready? Julia nodded, taking a deep breath. The exhibition, Submerged and Surfacing, featured her unique blend of terrestrial and marine botanicals. Kelp dancing with wildflowers, sea grasses intertwining with forest ferns, all rendered with scientific accuracy but emotional resonance. The gallery hummed with conversation as art lovers, botanists, and friends moved between her framed pieces. Julia found herself engaged in discussions about technique, ecological connections, and the emotional threads visible in her progression of work. This one, an elderly woman said, pointing to a piece near the end of the collection, a simple echeveria, the same type Leo had recommended that day at the nursery. There's something special about it, Julia smiled. It was the first thing I drew after a long period of not creating. A beginning. As the evening continued, Julia caught glimpses of Leo talking animatedly with her colleagues, Zara charming potential buyers, and most surprisingly, a representative from the Pacific Science Center discussing a possible permanent installation of her work in their botanical education wing. You did it, Leo whispered when he finally made his way back to her side. How does it feel? Julia considered the question, looking around at her art on display, her heart externalized, her pain transformed into beauty, her growth documented in chlorophyll and salt water. It feels like coming home to myself, she answered truthfully. Later that night, they walked along the beach near Leo's apartment, shoes in hand, cool water lapping at their ankles. The exhibition had been a success beyond Julia's hopes, but this quiet moment felt like the true celebration. I have something for you, Leo said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small box. Inside lay a pendant, a tiny glass terrarium containing miniature living plants. So you always carry a little growing thing with you, he explained. A reminder that life continues, adapts, thrives in the most unexpected places. Julia's eyes filled with tears as Leo fastened the necklace around her throat. I love you, she said, words she hadn't spoken in years, words she'd once thought she might never say again. Leo's smile was as warm as the day they met. I love you too, standing there with the sound of waves as their soundtrack. Julia realized that love wasn't about completing each other, but about growing alongside one another, two separate beings choosing to intertwine their roots while reaching for their own light. As they walked home hand in hand, Julia noticed how the moonlight silvered the edges of ordinary things, beach grass, driftwood, shells, transforming them into art waiting to be seen. Tomorrow she would capture these moments in her sketchbook. Tomorrow, and all the days after. The silence that had once echoed with loneliness now spoke volumes of possibility, of tender beginnings, of a future unfolding one brushstroke at a time.